The first day of the redistricting, one of them pretty much told me, you guys are a minority group. There's no chance of you guys getting what you're going to ask for. But I still got up and gave a testimony.
Racism exists in North Dakota. It always has.
Growing up being racially taunted, discriminated, that still continues on today.
The discrimination that I feel that is still happening relates back to the addresses.
We've had reports of racial discrimination at some of the previous polling places.
Racial discrimination is still a thing.
Native Americans have never had a fair shot in North Dakota.
North Dakota is a small state. There are less than 1 million people in North Dakota. Around 30,000 are Native Americans, who are the largest minority group in the state.
Our reservations are colonially underserved. They're very rural, very isolated. We have high rates of poverty, and the traditional gridding system isn't adequate on reservations, and so homes do not have a physical address.
A lot of those things overlap with the right to vote.
What we find is that Native votes are being suppressed by structural barriers, and then they're the result of contemporary suppression tactics like intimidation and racism in order to further suppress Native American votes.
It's a little bit demoralizing to a certain degree to know that we have to continue to fight for this right.
The modern-day story starts in 2012, when Native Americans flexed their political power and were credited with the surprise win of Heidi Heitkamp, a Democratic senator in a majority Republican state.
Heitkamp won her seat by fewer than 3,000 votes.
One of the last precincts to report was a Fort Berthold precinct, which is the Mandan Hidatsa Arikara Nation.
You had a group of educated voters that realized that they had the power to vote in the person that they wanted.
The very next year, the North Dakota legislature passed a voter ID bill that most deviously required addresses on IDs when they knew there were Native American communities in North Dakota that did not have addresses on their homes.
They did this after decades of having a voter ID process that worked for everybody.
With that came people being turned away at poll sites, new rules being put in place to stop rural areas such as reservations from having a streamlined way of voting.
They are modern-day literacy tests. They're tests that people cannot overcome because of the structure of their communities.
They communicate to Native Americans that, in a way, they're powerless.
NARF joined with Turtle Mountain plaintiffs and challenged the ID law and won. Immediately, the legislature passed an even stricter ID law and kept the address requirement.
We could see right away the effect that this ID law was having on our communities.
NARF joined with tribal plaintiffs and challenged this overt discrimination and won again. But instead of complying with the district court order, the state decided to appeal to the 8th Circuit. This appeal delayed Native Americans the right to vote without the required ID until after the election in 2018. In that election, Heidi Heitkamp lost her bid for re-election.
Courts are very aware of these deadlines. They know when elections are.
Eventually, NARF was able to secure a win through a settlement agreement, allowing tribal members without addresses a means to vote.
And it's our right to vote for our representatives in this state.
But North Dakota's voter suppression did not end with the ID law.
I think the biggest thing that we're facing right now in North Dakota with voting rights is really around redistricting and the gerrymandering of Native American districts.
State and county officials in North Dakota have been diluting the Native vote.
We've had a history of racial bloc voting, gerrymandering, things of that nature.
After every census, state and county officials redraw district lines to reflect population changes. During the last redistricting process, the MHA Nation, working with NARF, pushed hard to secure fair maps for their members. As a result, an MHA woman won a seat representing her community in the state legislature.
I decided to run for District 4A because we needed a voice at the table.
But North Dakota officials would not let this stand. After Lisa DeVille's win, state legislatures challenged the districts, and MHA tribal members, represented by NARF, were forced to stand up for their rights again. MHA secured a win in district court, but the challengers have appealed to the Supreme Court, and the Secretary of State has now abandoned its defense of the fair map.
We have to fight because North Dakota has not stopped discriminating against Native Americans.
After winning by the tribe side at the district court level, the Secretary of State is telling the Supreme Court to invalidate that victory because it was based on the Voting Rights Act.
If that sounds crazy, it's because it is. And when you manipulate a voting system to keep certain voters out because of their race, that's antithetical to America. And we need the Voting Rights Act to protect our values.
Meanwhile, in another part of the state, the legislature started with a discriminatory map that would have cut Native majority seats to one representative, despite the Native population in that area increasing.
The impact was significant. For the first time since 1990, there was no Native American representation in the North Dakota Senate.
As a result, Turtle Mountain, Spirit Lake Nation, and members of the tribes were forced to challenge this portion of the state legislative map in court.
It was a clear victory at trial. This was a judge who saw compelling facts and ruled in favor of the tribal plaintiffs.
After the tribes won a trial, North Dakota appealed to the 8th Circuit, which has been issuing unprecedented voting rights opinions. In a case out of Arkansas, the 8th Circuit declared that only the DOJ could bring lawsuits under the Voting Rights Act itself.
That is especially egregious because individual plaintiffs are the ones that have been bringing voting rights claims since the very beginning. Over the last 40 years, 182 cases were brought successfully under the Voting Rights Act. Out of those 182 cases, the DOJ only brought 15 of those. So really, it's been private plaintiffs and tribes that have been bringing these cases all along.
In their appeal, Turtle Mountain and Spirit Lake are arguing that they can bring their Voting Rights Act claim under another statute that provides a right to sue. This case will determine whether voters in the 8th Circuit can continue to use the Voting Rights Act to defend their voting rights.
North Dakota is testing out a radical theory that says that Native Americans can't bring voting rights cases at all. And 15 attorney generals from other states have joined the brief, agreeing with this radical theory.
This case could set the stage for the Supreme Court to gut the Voting Rights Act nationwide.
The Voting Rights Act remains as relevant today as it did in 1965.
Another case in North Dakota brought this past year presents yet another reason why the Voting Rights Act remains so important.
Because of the at-large election system in Benson County, tribal members are unable to elect the candidates of their choice, despite representing 40% of the voting age population in the county.
NARF represented the Spirit Lake Nation to challenge Benson County's at-large method of election that has been discriminating against Natives for decades.
This situation was particularly outrageous because DOJ had already brought a case against Benson County.
But the DOJ case resulted in a consent decree that Benson County brazenly violated for over 10 years without any response from the DOJ. It wasn't until the Spirit Lake Nation and tribal members sued to enforce the consent decree that Benson County implemented 2 districts that provided Natives the opportunity to elect representatives to county government.
I think this stresses the importance of the need for tribes and tribal members to be able to bring these cases in federal court.
It wasn't until a tribe and its members, not the DOJ, fought back that the rights of Native voters in North Dakota were vindicated.
Actors that are trying to do away with the Voting Rights Act are trying out radical theories in order to make the Voting Rights Act less effective. And then they're going to take these radical theories and try them out on a national stage. So the North Dakota is really where these attacks on the Voting Rights Act for all minorities and for all voters start.
Tribes and tribal members across North Dakota have stood up against discriminatory voter ID laws, stood up against unfair legislative districts, and have stood up to defend the Voting Rights Act for all Americans.
The day you don't fight is the day you lose ground.
Being able to elect candidates that understand tribal sovereignty, that understand the importance of protecting our lands and our waters, of lifting up our children, our missing and murdered women and elders. That's why we do this.
We're intertwined. If we're going to be intertwined and be self-reliant on each other, it's best to have an election system that is fair.
I believe in democracy. I believe democracy is a living thing. I believe that if we do not put in and be a part of the democracy, it will fail us.
I think voting is important to our tribal communities to stand up for the beliefs and to the injustices that we as Native people in Native America have faced continuously.
We have voices, and when things change, we need to be made aware of those things because we are overlooked all the time.
50 years we've had the option to vote as a Native people. Those systems have been in place long before that 50 years. It's not going to change overnight, but we fight every day.
When I was growing up, my grandmother used to always say to me, one day you're going to be standing up for your people.